Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Nick Gallo for episode 6 of the FCPA Survival Guide. Today, we're going to take up clawbacks and holdbacks. These strategies are relatively new to the DOJ's arsenal and, more importantly, how they want companies to employ them in enforcement actions. Although financial incentives have obviously been a part of the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program since at least 2012, when the original FCPA resource guide came out, the DOJ has not focused as intently on the disincentive side. The change came in 2023 with the Monaco Memo and the 23 update to the evaluation of corporate compliance programs, as the DOJ wanted companies to focus financial incentives on promoting compliant behavior and emphasizing a corporation's commitment to doing so. The way they wanted us to change, or at least modify, this disincentive, Nick, was through holdbacks and clawbacks. A holdback is money that is kept from being paid to an employee who may have been a part of an FCPA violation, typically a discretionary bonus, because you cannot hold back people's salaries by force of federal law and state law as well. A clawback is when you actually take money back that you have previously paid. This may require you, certainly require you to ask the person you paid the money to give the money back. They may balk at that, and then you may actually have to file suit to get the money back. So what the DOJ did was create a pilot program to assess the efficacy and effectiveness of this new clawback and holdback. And they have made the decision to give companies a dollar-for-dollar credit for any monies they either hold back or clawback. Now, in the enforcement actions that we saw and we've been looking at, SAP really went in the holdback position. They withheld bonuses of over $109,000 from employees who were engaged in the conduct, had supervisory authority over employees who were engaged in the conduct, or those who engaged in willful blindness. Rather amazingly, Albemarle was able to withhold bonuses of some $763,000 plus during the course of their internal investigation from supervisory employees and those who knew about the conduct but were willfully blindfold, and those who engaged in the conduct. So Albemarle got $763,000 off their overall fine and penalty, and SAP got over $100,000 back. So that's pretty significant credit. You and I over the years have talked about financial incentives, but this really focuses on the disincentive or punishing employees. Where do you shake out in terms of this, either negative consequences or disincentives or punishing people?
Yeah, I just think it's just another flavor of an incentive. People respond to incentives. That's like the number one rule of life. And I think it sends a really clear message to the organization that or to the employee base, that the organization is serious about this commitment to integrity. I think it's you just get a different reaction from folks when you start talking about money. It's like the purest kind of udil that exists. It's the purest denomination that's out there, and people respond to those changes. And it's like a voluntary response to it. It adds some gravity to whatever it is you're talking about. In my experience in running a business, it's usually the fastest way to change a behavior by putting some kind of incentive in place. And whether that's a consequence or whether that's some kind of a reward, a carrot or a stick, people are going to respond to it. And, and on some level, it's a little bit interesting that it's sort of, it's 2024 and we're talking about this. People have been responding to incentives since the beginning of time. And so much of what ethics and compliance is meant to do is to guide behaviors and influence those behaviors. And I think it's appropriate that we're talking about this thing now. So much of somebody's comp is tied to their, especially at these higher levels in organizations, so much of their comp is tied to the bonus. And if that bonus is in jeopardy because the operation that you're responsible for is not running how it should or not exhibiting the values that it's supposed to, then you do have some culpability in that, because the buck should stop with you as the leader, in my mind.
This incentive or this tactic, Nick, strikes me as something that the DOJ wants companies to do for reasons far beyond the individual companies, because obviously it sends a message to the employees of the companies involved themselves, here SAP, Albemarle, et cetera, hopefully they will not find themselves in FCPA hot water again. But I'm thinking this may send a message to the wider corporate America or corporations who are subject to the FCPA, and that what the DOJ is trying to communicate through these enforcement actions is, company, you'll get a benefit, but company employees, you'll be punished. And it won't be us that's punishing you, the Department of Justice. It will be your employer. And guess what? We're going to incentivize your employer to punish you. Just listening to your remarks about the util and how we obviously are all incentivized one way or another through financial incentives, maybe the DOJ's on to something a little bit bigger than even the companies involved here. Any real thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's pushing responsibility down to the individual level or to the leader level. And there's so much inefficiency that's come from the creation of corporations as entities. Like they're technically entities from the government's perspective or from a tax perspective, but that allows for a lot of passing the bag kind of behavior that leads to this kind of corruption and so forth. And I just think being able to zoom in and push that responsibility and push that accountability deeper into an individual within the company is going to cause a change in behavior that should, in my experience or in my view, that should lead to better behavior, better corporate behavior, because the buck doesn't stop with this sort of tax entity. It can stop with an individual who's actually responsible and actually accountable for the behavior of the people that they're leading.
Do you think employees actually think about, oh, I might lose my bonus if I engage in this? Is this granular enough? Or is that our job to communicate it granularly enough to employees that, yes, this can happen to you?
I think it does. I think it does work. Whether every day somebody is thinking about, is this activity or is this action I'm going to take going to jeopardize my bonus? I don't think it's not that granular of a control, but I think it's it's a control that has a big enough impact that it really does influence and color the environment that people are in. It sets the stage for the type of company that you're in. If you're in a company that you believe is really serious about something or some value, then you're going to act in accordance with that, because that seems to be a rule. Think about this. There are all these laws on the books, right? There's all these laws on the books, and some of these are like bizarre laws, like you can't ride a donkey through town after 5 on a Sunday. You know what I'm saying? These bizarre laws. So like those laws are still on the books. So what makes them not laws? It's that they're not being enforced. If there's no teeth to a law, it just doesn't really exist. And there's so many values on the wall in our organizations, and there's so many policies and rules that don't get enforced, that there's this sort of idiosyncratic recipe in every employee's mind of what matters and what doesn't matter. And I'm just saying, if you have an incentive, a stick, so to speak, that's that big that could hit somebody's bonus in terms of a clawback, this is dollars that have been deposited in your account that now you have to cut a check back to the organization for. There's a certain pain in that, and there's a certain gravity to that kind of an incentive that I think sends a broader sort of cultural message that helps people understand like what's actually in bounds and what's actually out of bounds, irrespective of what the words on the pages of the policies or the code of conduct say.
Nick, I've had the opportunity to visit with both you and your brother Gio over the years around financial incentives, and you guys have been very upfront and the leaders in the discussion in positive incentives.
Yep.
Here we have clearly a negative incentive, and there's one strand of compliance training and communication which says that don't treat people like felons. Don't tell them we're going to punish you. Really maybe spin to the other side a little bit, which is try to put it positively. Is this program the Department of Justice has in place around clawbacks and holdbacks too punitive, or you find it really an appropriate response if someone did engage in bribery and corruption, or if they were a supervisor and allowed it to happen, or if they were willfully blind?
I think it's appropriate. Yeah, I think it's appropriate. Like everybody's responsible for the team that they're over or for the job that they have to do. And that means that if you're a leader of a team, you're responsible for the behavior of those folks. If we go to the board and there's been a bunch of wrongdoing here, then who do you think they're going to blame? They're going to blame me and my brother because we clearly didn't put the right controls in place or build the right circumstances for integrity or whatever it is we're talking about. So I think it's appropriate. I don't think it's too punitive. And I think it at least allows for a mechanism for a well-intending compliance team or a well-intending organization to put something in place and make a change that is a kind of a more clear articulation of a commitment to integrity. If I'm going to go into your bank account and pull that money back, that's something I'm really serious about. And I think it ends up driving those behaviors. And you were talking about the positive and negative incentives, and I'm reading this book right now called 11 Rings, and it is about Phil Jackson and his coaching of the Bulls and the Lakers. And he talks about how he was able to reel in Dennis Rodman. And the way he was able to do that is he was like, you know what? I didn't get sucked into his games, but I was just very clear with him around what I expect and what the consequences were. And Dennis Rodman went on to say that Phil Jackson was the best coach he ever had because he, quote unquote, treated him like a man. And I think treating somebody like an adult and explaining to them, yes, we want this to be a culture full of positive incentives, but there's also, this car can go off the road. And if it goes off the road, then this is what's going to happen. These are the consequences of that. I think it's a point of clarity, and it's a point of maybe authentic representation of what the company actually cares about.
It also strikes me that if we talk about driving or operationalizing compliance literally to the front lines, we should also have the same discussion about negative consequences if those front lines intentionally engage in illegal conduct. And you don't negligently bribe someone. You intentionally bribe someone, and you intentionally create a pot of money to pay a bribe within a corporation, however you create it. Perhaps if you do fully operationalize by pushing our clients down to the front lines, it is appropriate to also punish those who engage in illegal conduct after having been trained and monitored.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate. Like, it all has to be as homogenous as possible. Like, the adherence to these principles and adherence to these values need to be as homogenous as possible. The homogeny is going to be a function of those kind of similar behaviors. So this is appropriate to me. It drives the behavior we want, and it pushes that behavior and incentive deeper into the company to the individual level versus the sort of abstract tax entity level.
Nick, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us for our next episode. We're going to take up lesson number 7, changing your business model. I can't wait to question you on that one.